when you're running in and the sun isn't up, you don't have any of the UV exposure. That's the real game changer. And that's why the desert's so difficult, because there isn't any shade. When the sun's up, you're in the sun all day long.
Sweaty man hugs. I'm sure you missed that.
Topless, let's just clarify.
Yeah, yeah, topless. Yeah, definitely like that. Yeah, yeah. So straight off the back of 30 days, 30 marathons in Jordan, Chris Taylor,
Yeah.
known as Taylor to his buddies, coaching with Spencer Matthews. So he did something that was pretty big for him. He's what you would probably say is in his own words, a non-runner, but has become quite a runner in the last little while. And I had the opportunity to come and do a hydration sweat test with yourself as part of Precision Hydration, but Spencer never did anything along these lines of understanding his sweat sodium. So we discovered that you lost around 1,003 milligrams, to be precise, in your genetic sweat compound in your when we did our test, and then actually Spencer was 920, which is pretty much bang on the same as you. And if we put that in averages, it's 950 milligrams for an average sweater. So that gave us a direction in terms of some sodium requirements for multiple days in the heat. And then he obviously did some heat acclimation work, which you can touch on, which is awesome. We want to just chat about the desert, the challenges, how you stayed on top of the daily sweating, the amount of volume of fluid, chat a bit about some data maybe around how much fluid he lost based on, I saw some of your stats that we had, and how you managed that basically day to day, firstly from the hydration side, which is quite fascinating because it's not been done that extent for so many days.
Yeah, yeah. So to address the first one, I think a good place to start is talking about Spencer and his description of himself as kind of a recreational runner, and yeah, it's a good place to start from, because I do think for anyone listening to this, it you can be inspired by the elites, but it can be difficult to relate to them. Whereas someone like Spencer, for sure, what he's done is an incredible world record breaking challenge. But as you said, by his own admission, he's only really been running seriously, and I call seriously as
Yeah.
working. You don't have to work with a coach to be serious, but working purposefully, intentionally, trying to improve his endurance performance since January of this year, really. And the challenge was in July and August, mostly August. So that's not a huge amount of time. Yeah, he's has a back history of having done big events like MDS and stuff. But again, by his own admission, didn't fully prepare for them at all. So yeah, I think it's interesting for anyone who is maybe starting out or has been going for a few years, that this is, you can yeah, relate to the kind of
Yeah.
Spencer who's been going now seriously for about 8 months. So yeah, we pretty much immediately, I think, reached out to Precision, who I've been working with for a few years now, and yeah, you guys were the obvious port of call for checking in and just making sure we have some data to be working off before we head out to the desert. So yeah, first thing was the sweat test, or sweat concentration test, I should say. Is that what you call it? Yes,
Yeah.
you do.
Sodium
Yeah,
concentration, spot on. Yeah.
sodium concentration. Yeah, which we did in London. You came and did yourself, which was great. And yeah, it was the result is the result, and it's not really good or bad. It's just a personal result, but it was nice to kind of be it would have been slightly more, not necessarily challenging, but just have more admin if he was a
Yeah.
slightly more concentrated sodium sweater. So for both of us to be bang in the middle was
Bang on
quite easy.
averages. Yeah, yeah. It's
Mm.
easy to manage.
And then
Yeah.
also just the number 1,000. This is really simple. Fine, he's a bit under, but 1,000 milligrams an hour per liter. Sorry, then you're golden. So that was nice. That was nice and easy. Yeah, and then we did his heat acclimation protocol was pretty intense actually. We had toyed with the idea of just doing like an active passive protocol, so doing his running during the day, then just sitting in his. He actually has a sauna at his home, which again, going back to the inability to relate to some people, that's difficult to relate to Spencer in that regard. A lot of us aren't that fortunate,
Yeah.
but he had that option, and that's a good protocol, by the way, for anyone who is thinking of doing some heat acclimation, doing the active. Go do a normal run session, 20 to 30 minutes in a sauna. Brilliant. But the gold standard, if you have access to it, is in my mind, to do some actual active. So doing his training sessions in a climate controlled heat chamber, which we were very lucky to have access to at London South Bank University. So he worked with Dr. Freya Bain. I think, did you say you knew her or knew
Yeah,
of
yeah.
her?
I knew her name in
Yeah.
the hydration world. Yeah, fantastic setup they've got there. Yeah,
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, and also again available to anyone. That's not like a closed resource. You can obviously you have to pay for the service, but it's available and not extortionately expensive for what it is.
for what it is. Yeah,
Yeah, so I think we again battling with Spencer's schedule here, but I think we managed to get I think it was 7 or 8 sessions in, and obviously, well not obviously, but the goal is to try and get those as consecutive and condensed as you can, ideally 2 to 3 weeks before competition.
yeah,
So for Spencer, yeah, we did 7 or 8 over about 10 days, and these varied between an hour and 2 hours of him running between 45 and 50 degrees Celsius temperature and 20 to 40% humidity, which is roughly what we were expecting. And we'll get onto this point in a minute, but that's what we were expecting in the heat of the day, which is, not what we were running in at all times. So we'll come back onto that. But yeah, we did 7 to 8 sessions in there. He then went to Spain for a week before we flew to the desert, which was great. He was right in the south of Spain, midday temperatures, 30 degrees plus. So actually, that was some really good, not in country, but not far off the kind of natural environment, which again, if you can get to that, talking about gold standard, that's the gold standard, right? You fly to where you're racing and run around there for 2 weeks. Again, not available to most people, but um, yeah, a bit of both, a bit of we managed to do some climate control and then some not quite in country, but not far off the climate he was expecting, which is brilliant. And the whole time testing the sodium and fueling strategy that you guys had helped with, which is great. Yeah, it's very lucky to have all of those resources 'cause it makes a massive difference.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great insight. Yeah, I think that's key, certainly from my coaching perspective and learnings, and exactly what you summed up. Getting inside a heat chamber is just super gold standard, and trying to get those parameters. That was intense, 40 to 50 degrees for someone that's not done stuff in that extreme. We've all been to probably 35, 38 degrees, and we might be on holiday. I've experienced 40 in South Africa, dry heat, but then early 40s in Hawaii with the humidity, and it poses a wet heat challenge. So you know all about that from your expeditions around the world, doing all sorts. It's intense. So that's actually hats off to him. He seemed to sail through I say sail through when I was chatting to you briefly through that July period. He managed those all right. Freya said, sweat rate was, I think he was losing up to 2 liters an hour, but that's in a closed environment you can't really. That was just some good data, and his the joy of doing some of that acclimation work is your sweat rate changes, your body adapts, that sweat rate drops, your blood plasma increases, and you actually won't rely so much on sodium as well through exposure to quite a lot of heat work before. So that helps then when you get to the event, the challenge. But he was
That's
there for
something I was
many.
going to say.
Oh yeah,
Just to cut in would have been really nice. I mean, it was just a time thing, but it would have been nice to have, all the things we measure before, we measure his sweat rate before he starts his acclimation protocol
yeah,
and after, and that's great. And you see that change. But
yeah,
we would have been great to measure the sodium concentration and see just how much. And it's not something I've ever done before, so I know that that it does change your sodium concentration, and ideally it becomes slightly more dilute because your volume is going up and then you lose less sodium per
yeah,
liter. It would be nice to measure the change. It could have been minimal,
yeah.
20
It
milligrams, could have been
from yeah,
100.
exactly, yeah. From the knowledge I know through what the team are doing on the headquarters in Poole Precision, have just built their own heat lab. Anyway, I'm going down to see it in about 10 days. And they, I know, doing exactly a bit of this to check the changes because of the tour riders they work with. But it's not such, what we do know, it's not such a drastic, massive change that you have to change your whole hydration strategy, which is good to know, because obviously if you test and then so you don't have to retest when you do this 45-minute, 1 hour non-invasive advanced sweat test, which anyone can do, and it's not super expensive. And I certainly do recreational and amateur all the way up to pro elite runners testing. So that's good just to note there. So his sweat rate, of course, was quite important because you could take that information just on top of, you never really you never really replace like for like, which is one of the bits we try to relate to you and Spencer. He had a lot going on in his mind. The main thing was he was also quite worried about not worried. He was like, "Do I have to have gels every day?" And I was quite an advocate of, well, even if you multiple days, so 2, 3, 4 days, and you know yourself from doing ultras, you don't really want to rely on just the quick, reliable, fast sugars. And that we're the first people to say, well, actually, no, we want to train on some real food, use some real food. You will just get that palate fatigue. So I believe you can sort of elaborate briefly on the fueling. He was happy just to eat non-sports products. He obviously drank the hydration and water and fluids. A hypertonic drink is what we were after. But roughly through that 4 hour average running in the morning, 4.5 hours, was he eating just real food or?
Yeah, yeah. So he was quite I mean you got to also look at there's the what should we call it, the peak performance version of
Yeah, yeah.
nutrition, which people are moving at the paces that typically we're training them to move at. You're not eating real food. There's no two ways about it. Just because you're not going to be able to stomach that or even probably even chew it. It's just the ease of being able to drink an extremely hypertonic drink or down a gel is
Yes.
just so we're talking about actual efficiency, ignoring how your body's going to respond to it. You don't have a choice. Then there's the battle with talking about ultras. You have to carry a lot of what you need for 12 hours. You're not carrying real food. In that situation, you can get, well, I don't actually know. What's the 30-gram precision gel actually weigh? Well, probably a
Oh,
couple of grams more, maybe
60 grams. Yeah.
60 total. Yeah.
So
So you got
yeah,
30 grams of carbs for carrying 60 grams. Like,
yeah.
it's pretty unbeatable. And then also the ease of that being in a wrapper that you can just undo and keep on. Yes, it's a lot of it is also the ignoring what the fueling will do to your body. It's just the ease of what you can have. Whereas then you transition to a fully supported event where we've got 2 or 3 4x4s following us around for a month, and you suddenly go, well, okay, right, this is a real privileged situation to be in. Um, and Spencer's preference, as I think most people will probably
Yeah.
would be, we don't eat gels for breakfast for a reason. You eat what you like. So yeah, so breakfast was very much like carb heavy, lots of bread, pittas, hummus, that sort of thing. It's also I talk about the positive of having the vehicle with you, but then the negative of being in the desert. It's still not, like there's no Tesco Express around the corner. So it's still balancing availability. But yeah, he had a couple of eggs in the morning, some pitta, hummus, um, a bit of salad. They were quite big on like cucumber and things like that, which isn't particularly, nutritious in terms of what's going to give you dense, but nice, just healthy, fresh food for breakfast. And then mid-run, I mean, the predominant thing he relied upon, and when I say it, you kind of be like, well, yeah, that's kind of what we're dealing with, is dates. Dates
I remember
are not
we chatted about
far
that.
off the
Yeah.
gel.
And he's like, "Yeah, I love dates," and I was like, "Just be careful. It's it's quite fibrous and quite high
But
glycemic."
yeah,
Yeah.
in terms of your carb content, brilliant.
Oh,
Name a natural food as close to a gel. Dates are pretty close.
and they're falling off the trees when you can find the
Yeah,
trees, probably in your neck of the woods.
exactly. But like you said, you're looking at 100% GI pretty much, so straight into the bloodstream, which carries its own issues,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
extremely fibrous. For anyone who's had a lot of dates consecutively, I can attest to having, issues before with that. So we'd have a lot of dates, fruit as much as we can during the run, but difficult to transport, especially in the desert. Nuts and things, which again, great for his recovery, perhaps post run. It's nice to have during the run. Not
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
really add a whole lot of, depending on the quantity you can stomach. Maybe not have a huge amount of difference to your carb intake, depending on the nut. And then yeah, if we can have some kind of main lunch stops, not lunch, but yeah, I mean it was again come on to timings in a minute, but lunch was sort of like 6:30,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
7 a.m.
You're
So
like, great.
yeah, halfway stop, not lunch stop. That would be a bit more maybe like again the pitta kind of vibe. But yeah, we always had precision gels in my mind. I suspected there'd be times where yeah we'd actually need to rely on that for um just because we needed a quick fix.
Yeah.
But thankfully, that never happened. Never happened. I
Wow.
had a few. Yeah, I was. When we went into the canyons where we were doing kind of 25 to 30K stretches without the support vehicle. Yeah, I obviously fuel on gels and things. But yeah, Spencer, we didn't need to at all, which is great. There's no if you can get away with it, get away with it. It's yeah, the privilege of having the support vehicle is being able to mix up your strategy a lot more. It's not something I'd recommend your average triathlete or ultra runner to
Ultra runner to do.
start
Yeah.
cracking on with. But yeah,
No, that's great. It just shows you don't have to rely fully on sports nutrition, but the key message is to really understand the way I see it, and I think most of the top sports nutritionists will also agree that it's mainly just understanding the fuel requirements, the demand of the event. So it's long and slow. It's multiple days. It's not a high intensity where the quick sugars example you just ran, a Berlin Marathon. So of course that's a higher intensity over a shorter space, 3 hours, and you need quick, fast calories when you're at a low intensity. If you have pretty good fat metabolism, you can pretty much rely on different fuels and you have stores. So that's just a really good example of two extremes. I think that's fantastic, and I'm so happy that it could use real food because it's a bit more enjoyable. And so you didn't run pretty much every single day the whole distance. You were running parts of it. You probably covered half of it most days. You run quite a bit, huh?
yeah, just as needed. Yeah, yeah. We also had the physio Johnny. He was a good runner, so he ran and supported as well. And then the medic Josh, he came and did a bit as well. So yeah, it was a real team effort. Yeah, Spencer was never ran alone, which is amazing to have
Yeah, yeah.
that depth of support. Yeah.
How much would he drink? My first question, roughly. As in the early part of the morning when it was dark. It's much. When I say cooler, it was not obviously it's the cooler part of the. That's why you chose the 5 a.m. or 4 5 a.m. versus 10 11 a.m. And then roughly speaking, it's probably hard to know, but do you have any data on X amount of dates, how much you had plus the fuel stop, so pita bread, 20 30 grams, so roughly 3 or 4 5 hour run, how much he might have consumed?
So yeah, the data collection side of it was actually it was pretty interesting. So the Dr. Freya Bain, who I mentioned earlier at LSBU, she's pretty active at the minute in research. She's publishing all the time.
Oh wow.
And so every day I would collect as much data as possible. The kind of just to go over some of the markers, it was, every kind of did, and it wasn't always easy to manage, but we take breaks approximately every 8 to 12 kilometers ish, dependent on terrain and things
So
and how we're
roughly,
moving.
yeah, 45 to an hour and a quarter, yeah, hour and ish,
Something like that.
yeah, somewhere
Yeah.
around, yeah.
So I jot down the time of day, the distance we were at. We would do an air temperature and humidity gauge, so with an actual monitor just to see what it was where we were at. His heart rate is being monitored continuously, of course, but we jot that down. We had the body cap pill that he was ingesting. So he would ingest that the night before. So that was giving an accurate, it's an invasive measurement. It's literally sitting in his core. It's the most accurate way of doing it. That's being measured continually, but I jot that down at these stops. I then jot down the fluid intake since the previous stop, the sodium intake since the previous stop, and a rough gauge of fuel. But the fueling, because we weren't using sports nutrition, was almost impossible to,
Yeah.
well, you could do it for sure, but it was a big ask from me to be
Well,
working that out.
yeah, after the third day and you're trying to count dates and nuts and it's a handful and something drops. Yeah, that's what I guessed. I thought it would have been, yeah, it's just maybe back to what we said because it's long and slow. I left that out a second ago, was you probably only really need 40, 50 grams of carbohydrates potentially if 3 dates are like a gel, roughly speaking, because the recommendations are often quite pointed at 60 to 90 grams, as you know, and people listening to this are like, okay, so how did he have, that's like 3 gels. I'm like, no, actually, at that work rate, yeah, you don't necessarily need Superman. You can rely a little bit more on fats, and also there's protein stops, and so that's really nice to hear. So okay, so you're
And that's just on that note, if we could linger on that, because I think it's an important point.
yeah, yeah,
Because we're talking about the 60 to 90 all the time. And we're looking at, just to reference again, the marathon at the weekend. Jess was doing 80 bang on. She uses gels that have 40-gram carb content and it's 80 an hour. And that's great. And she's using it. She needs it. That's why she needs to do it. And the tricky thing I see quite frequently with athletes who'll go out and do right gut run, they call it, or gut
that run,
training,
yeah,
and they run for a very long distance, but not running that quickly. And then so you start packing in 100 or more grams of carbs, and you're not using it, and then that just sits in your GI, and that's causing the issue. And then you think, oh, well, actually, the takeaway is, well, 90 is too much for me. I can't actually use that. Well, no, you probably can if you're working at a rate that requires that, but you're just not burning that amount. And so that's quite a key point. It's not something we came across necessarily in the desert because that was never
Ah,
our strategy. But just to linger on that point, I think it's important because it
beautiful.
is a clear, not necessarily a mistake, but just a misunderstanding. I think that some people can fall into, yeah, getting a bit confused with. But yeah, to be absolutely clear, Spencer is absolutely nowhere near. 60 grams would have been probably top end of what he's using. And again, you can measure this, so it would have been nice to have done a fat max test and say, look, at this heart rate, at this work rate, you're burning this amount. But then also you do that in a controlled laboratory, and you find we could have done that in the heat chamber, perhaps. But
Yeah,
even then, like you said, it's an environment which, we're looking at just the sweat stuff that we did measure in there. You're going to sweat significantly more in that heat chamber because you're just in this controlled environment with no airflow and all the rest of it. So it's all of these things have to be taken, with a little bit of pinch of salt anyway. But anyway, so you could have done the fat max test, but I suspect if I were to guess, and we'll get into the other data we did actually measure, but if we were talking carbs, I would say absolute top end for any individual hour would have been 50. I'd probably say actually quite a lot lower even than we would have said, probably more like 30 to 40 for any given hour. And even at that low work rate, he probably, he would have been in a deficit for sure. Never a deficit, we never came close to bonking or anything like that. But you also have to think in this multi-day thing, the work rate's pretty low and you don't want to get yourself in a hole. But then you finish and you have 18 hours of zero activity and almost endless opportunities to refuel. So the fuel what we were eating from finish to start of the next marathon was a ginormous amount of food. That has to be taking it like a huge, just huge, like four massive meals.
really.
Um, just yeah, so we'd have that throughout, and then by the next morning, you're talking about starting from he never in these multi-day sims, sometimes you start to feel maybe a bit like your body weight will change naturally. A lot of that's water weight. That's fine, but you might feel it's just a bit. I don't know, like you're starting to eat yourself, is what people are saying. I'm eating my own protein. A lot of people, you're not really ever in that
Yeah,
situation, not on this extreme expedition. But that's how you start to feel. Spencer or anyone else in the team was never starting to feel like that, just because again the opportunity to refuel outside of the exercise was enormous. Um, so you were relying a little bit on that.
that's brilliant. I want to touch a bit on the real food in a sec. I don't have to go too much detail, but that's fascinating. But I think your little summary there 2 minutes ago was absolutely brilliant. Context is vital, and there's so much information going around carb dosage, and then there's the lovers and the haters, and exactly that. If you just step back and find out what your energy demands are, don't worry too much about the source, so where it's from. First, work out what your requirements are. There, you mentioned things like we don't know exactly bang on, but it will be our hunch is quite low, and people are like, "How did you run?" Well, yes, and I think that's really valuable information. Context is key. A 3 hour marathon, 4 hour marathon versus and the fuel just sitting in your gut. I think that was gold. So
Yeah,
thank you
and
for that.
just to add a bit of data to that, because I think we worked with Koros, they were the timing watch partner, and they published his data yesterday. I
Okay,
think it was yesterday.
I saw something.
I don't
Yeah,
know when this is going to go out, but yeah, it's on Instagram now. You can have a look. And his average heart rate was about 132. I think again we talk about stuff recorded, but 132, man, that's
yeah.
it's
He's almost
Yeah,
walking up a hill.
for
Yeah, he's
context, yeah,
yeah,
Jess said to me once at 35K yesterday, I'd put her on a talking ban, so don't talk.
yeah. Talking. Oh
And
yeah,
she,
talking about yeah,
because we were filming, because she had a requirement to talk a lot. And I was like, don't talk. But one thing she did say between 35 and 40ish, I think she said she got to me, my heart rate's 182. And I said, yeah,
sure.
I mean that's
Well, it's
scary for
fun.
that time of the marathon, but that's realistic. That's what you might hit towards the tail end of a best effort, and that might be 3, 4, 5 for you, whatever. That is extremely different from a 132 heart rate, and that's his average. So he's starting the day in the
That,
120s
yeah,
when the sun's not even up yet. Yeah, he's probably finishing in the 140s,
yeah,
which the data we can talk about in a minute if we want. But the average you're looking at 132, and if we had done a fat max test, I've done it previously, and I know that around that rate I'm burning like 30 to 40 grams of carbs.
yeah, yeah. Very
Um,
low. And then that also would have changed because the fact that actually it's a bit like the Tour de France. they ride themselves into form by week 2, week 3. 2 weeks in, his fat max would have dropped like, yeah, exactly that, because he's fitter. But we don't have to get into the physiology on this too much. This is more like a fireside chat about something that's, yeah, just crazy cool to do and to be involved with. And I had a small little part, which is great, and you had a massive part. So just to go back to the food, without going to the lettuce and tomatoes, you eat, which is quite this is quite prominent, because you're a veggie slash or full vegan, yeah. So I just needed to clarify that. So yeah, you eat vegan. That part of the world might have been okay, just that you mentioned hummuses and pittas and stuff like that. And I know, obviously, which means no eggs, and so it's challenging. So it can be doable. Look how much you've done, and look, and you have a really good. If anyone looks on your profile, you have a good muscle mass as a runner, and that's the first thing I always look at. It is this person strong? Yes, you're an ultra runner in terms of you run up and down hills, but you have a really good muscle mass, which I find. I suppose that's a whole nother topic, also another rabbit hole. But a lot of runners, you'll know where I'm going with this, that potentially have that lower that choice of food choice, which is absolutely nothing wrong. You can get your protein. It's just much harder work. You've learnt over years to get that. Now, comparative Spencer, full meat eater. So this is great, because yes, you had to still run. You had to have function. Anyone running a training camp listening to this, a coach, it's quite a, you don't just sit around then once you stop running. There's a lot to do. You're on, besides when your eyes are closed, you're pretty much on all the time. So tell me a bit about that, the demands of that, the challenges, because that to me would be the first thing. I wouldn't stress too much about the running. I'd be more concerned with, right, how are we going to, yes, we've got some 4x4s. We need some generators with refrigeration. Yeah, that's what I want to know.
So the logistics of how we kind of kept the circus rolling, you mean?
The circus rolling, but also kind of what you, how you ate, like, what do you, I mean, yeah, the differences in you guys eating. So he'd be having full blown food, and obviously you had to get some. You need requirements as well. You know, you trying to hit 2 grams of protein probably per kilogram. You're about 80 kilos.
Bang
Or
on, yeah, that's roughly
yeah,
what I write at, yeah.
he's probably mid 70s. I know he lost probably a bit of. Sorry, he probably was close to 80, but lost a few kilos. That's just obviously through through that. But if we're trying to aim for 140, 150 grams of protein, you probably hit those targets. But it's harder for you. This is per
Mm.
day. So yeah,
Yeah, so
how are the challenges there?
yeah, it's not an environment you can have kind of like two, two different chefs, like the plant-based guy and the normal one. Even just the logistics of actually the facilities you have. And we had obviously a Bedouin team with us who were outstanding.
Yeah, yeah,
We had kind of a campsite guy and a standalone chef. So one guy whose sole job for 30 days is to just keep everyone fed. And to be honest, he probably worked as hard as Spencer. Like he had the real task on his hands. There was only our kind of UK team was five strong, and the Bedouins were five as well, so 10 of us, yeah, and keeping 10 people, fed for 4 meals a day we were doing for a month in that environment is
yeah,
no small feat. That's seriously impressive. And he was amazing. His name's Ehab. Um, and so yeah, we kind of did breakfast already, but lunch and the kind of evening meals, sometimes there'd be like it's dinner, but then a second helping later on. Um, my background's in the military. We used to do a thing called niners. So you have dinner at dinner time, supper, or whatever. And then niners would be the 9 p.m. You just go back down and just have a second dinner with the leftovers. Similar vibe to that. And with all the constraints of what you can actually do out there, and also just their I guess their local cuisine.
yeah.
In a nutshell, there's two words to it, and they had this, the lads, on repeat for
Oh,
pretty much a month, is rice and chicken.
yeah.
They can they can they just I can't
Rice
God knows
cookies.
how many chickens we got
Yeah,
through, but
yeah, yeah,
yeah, that was the finish meal would almost always be a super helping with rice and chicken with some salad and bits to keep it fresh on the side. But as you said, not too interested in that. It's not having a huge impact. And then occasionally the dinner meal, they eat goat out there, and there's goat shepherds that you can buy, because also you've got to remember where you're getting this food from. It's difficult on because we were constantly on the move. That's something perhaps worth mentioning. We didn't
yeah.
camp in the same spot
Never in the,
at
yeah,
all. just
No,
always moving on the roads. It's really difficult to do the shopping when you're doing that.
there's
Um,
no Ocado or Amazon, yeah, dropping off
no,
some salts, yeah.
definitely not. So yeah, so that was a challenge. But by and large, the two bulk ingredients, and there'd be vegetables in there as well, of course, but where your staple is rice, and your protein was typically chicken or sometimes goat, lamb occasionally, but I think they were calling the goat lamb anyway.
Yes,
I think that's just
I've been in North
a
Africa,
baby
and
goat.
they get it
Yeah.
slightly different. Yeah, yeah. So how did you eat then?
I kind of knew this was coming. I've been there before. I used to organise an ultramarathon out there. So actually, I didn't want to bring too many of these because also again just the size of them and carrying them around. But I did bring at least I had 30 dehydrated meals I brought with me, and they were big 1,000 calorie pack meals because I knew for sure that at least if I could have at least one of these a day, I knew I had some solid foundation.
Okay.
And I picked one that was a good mix between because they do again the vegan options aren't extensive. They're great, but not extensive. One which is quite carb heavy, one which is quite fat heavy, and one which is kind of somewhere in the middle. And we're talking about this reliance upon, actually, especially me, who again, not to talk too much about myself because it's about Spencer, but I've been doing this a lot longer in terms of the endurance stuff. My kind of fat reliance is significantly better is not the right word, but yeah,
You're more metabolically flexible. Yeah, you metabolically flexible. Yeah, he's just, which means you can utilize that
hmm.
fat as fuel. Yeah.
So actually, I kind of my requirement to have carbohydrates mid-run is probably even less, and then my need to actually replace my fat stores is quite substantial. And so I chose a meal that had these. But outside of my dehydrated meals, look, I mean, I can eat rice all day long. Yeah, I'm one reason I went vegan really is because I'm not a big foodie, so it's quite easy for me to sacrifice. Food is fuel. Yeah, I can eat this. I did the dehydrated meal I chose, by the way. I had that every single day, the same one for a month. Um, but coming back to the protein thing, much more difficult, really difficult. Wasn't a high protein count in the food. I had a lot of nuts all day long. Um, which can also come with its challenges. But yeah, it was
Ah,
it was difficult, and I didn't take like a protein recovery drink or anything because it comes down to space
space.
as well. You've
Yeah.
got a month of food to carry. If I can have 1,000 calorie meal, I'm probably going to choose that over having a recovery shake after every run. Um, so yeah, that was what I went for. But we did talk about it as a team. There's no two ways about it. I didn't. It's probably the least amount of protein I've eaten for a month in my life, maybe certainly in the last 10 years since I've been training seriously. And I'm fine.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
don't,
You're still here,
yeah,
and you managed to. I think you've done a couple of trips since then, and you've just come back from Berlin. Yeah, so you cruised a 3 hour marathon with someone. So yeah, you probably lost a little bit of weight, but that's you look pretty lean from some of your naked shots. You guys were doing some man hugs
mm,
quite
yeah.
regularly, sweaty man hugs. I'm sure you missed that.
Topless. Let's just clarify. Not
Yeah, yeah,
naked.
topless. Yeah, definitely like that. Yeah, yeah, topless. Not. Yeah, you weren't naked. A couple of questions there. Classic. So, do you know how many days he took off from chicken when he got back? That's my first question.
Yeah,
Has he touched it since? You should ask
I,
him.
d- I should. Yeah, I don't know for sure, but it was a thing we spoke about of never having chicken again.
I never want to start chicken. Chicken can go both way, either way. I
Yeah,
mean, I love. It's probably the nicest, nourishing meal, but yeah, you ideally you can't have it all the time. We spoke a bit about starting really early again, just with your timing. So right in the beginning, about that's quite pertinent. Actually, just coming back to kind of how much he drank, just to illustrate. Actually, you might have started just sipping on fluid and maybe touched on 400 or 500 mils for the first hour, but by maybe hour three, sun was coming up. You naturally drink a bit more. So listeners will know that yes, as you pull fluids up, generally the sodium will naturally come up with it. That's kind of in parallel. The carbohydrate, let's call it fuel, demands generally stay quite tightly managed. Certainly, if you're doing a marathon or a 6 hour ultra, that's quite controlled. But with the fluid and the sodium, so I assume you were doing well. I know you were doing some testing every sort of break, but it wouldn't be like how much fluid have you lost? That's not really, it doesn't work like that. But do you know more or less ballpark? Was he going to what we recommend as in going more on thirst, which is kind of how we should? And then, yeah,
yeah.
talk about the
But
timings of the day.
Well done for bringing us back on track. Good hosting. That was about 20
It
minutes
was.
ago I opened
Yeah.
this thing. Um, so yeah, so just to quickly do the time before we get into it. So we started at the very beginning of the challenge. Our aim, we were waking up at 2:30, so that would be the alarm.
Oh,
And get yeah, early. Get running between 3:30 and 4 because you also have to travel a little bit. So we'd have, it does take a while to, we weren't fully packing up camp. We had a separate camp, but it takes time in the morning, especially when you're operating in the dark. So we starting at 3:34. It's that time of year, sun was up kind of 6:30. So we get 2 hours at least without even the sun up. So when you're talking, so we do, yeah, you do all this heat training in this 40-degree chamber. And then I'd say, overnight, it's the coolest I think was probably like 18
yeah.
degrees. It's still warm, and that's the dead of night. By the time in the morning, we were still starting running in, I guess maybe like 20. Well, I have the data between 22 and 24. Let's pick a random day. Yeah, here we go. So marathon 19 is the first one that came up,
Oh,
and
yeah.
at 5. So, well, yeah, we started drifting a little bit towards the end to prioritize recovery, which is something we
Recovery.
could
Yeah.
talk about. But by marathon 19 that day, we started at 5:16, so that was a bit later. And the air temperature was 23. Humidity was 40. So even at 5 a.m., it's 23 degrees. And by the end that day, we finished at 10:25, and the temperature was 34.6. So it's gone up 11 degrees in that time. Humidity is still the same. Um, so yeah, so starting in cool, and also the difference, people talk temperature is just one thing. When you're running in and the sun isn't up, you don't have any of the UV exposure. That's the real game changer. And that's why the desert's so difficult, because there isn't any shade. When the sun's up, you're in the sun all day long. There's no two
Yeah.
ways about it. There's a couple of canyon days where you get a bit of shade, but literally 2 days where we did that. Um, as soon as that sun hits you, yeah, yeah, it's as if it's, even if it's 27 degrees, that suddenly becomes, yeah, it changed the second the sun came up. And so in the morning, yeah, this again, we'll choose marathon 19. So I would jot down this
Yeah.
fluid intake between when we woke up to the start was a liter. So kind
Yeah.
of roughly what you'd expect. And we had so we were using the pH 1500.
So you were preloading every morning with that, yeah, which is a hypertonic, just you would have got 750 milligrams of sodium in a in a drink there. Yeah.
Yeah. So that'd be the night before and first thing in the morning. And then between the start and the first stop, which that was a bit longer that day, so it's 14.3 kilometers. So that
Okay.
time was about an hour and 45, 5:16, 6, yeah, about an hour and 45. And then he had a liter in that one, which is actually quite a lot, I'd say, for
Yeah.
pretty cool temperature in the shade that time of morning, and another 1,500 milligram sodium tab. So again, that's 750 um, hypertonic. And then the next one was 10 kilometers bang on. That was 0.75 liters. Again, still quite a lot. I think he's drinking
Yeah.
quite well
You did
there.
really well.
Another 1,500, and then the last one, for some reason, we didn't stop between 24 and the finish. So that's a long, well, we might have stopped, but not recorded. Sometimes there's things going on. We actually had press to do sometimes mid-run, so it's a lot of things to manage. Um, but yeah, that one, so between, for 20 kilometers
Yeah.
there, he's had 2.25 liters and 3,000
2.25.
milligrams so,
Yeah.
of sodium. So
So 2.25 liters. Yeah, which is not a lot. He ran for but the average was like 44.5 hours of running. Yeah, am I right to say? I
of
mean,
running, yeah,
yeah,
with the
yeah. Obviously,
brakes.
there's breaks
Five.
and faffing around.
5:15, I think, with the breaks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Five-ish. So,
and what was good
yeah,
about being out there, so we weren't, again, weight loss, equating that to fluid loss is again a very crude measurement with all of the things you're taking on, and then the fuel as well, and what's being lost where is difficult to. It's not exact science for sure, but we would take a measurement in the morning anyway, and after the run. On this particular day, he was 78.9 when he started and 76.4 when he finished. That's two and
yeah,
a half kilos lost. Um, and his fluid intake was 4.75 liters and 6,000 milligrams of sodium. Um, so yeah, yeah, he's in a deficit. He's losing, yeah, he's
yeah.
losing
And
fluid.
then his body would make that back up through the day, partly from fuel, get some sodium from all the great. food that was prepared, obviously adding some real salts in as well, some minerals, and then obviously drinking through the day. But it was the big take homes there for me. It wasn't just pure water. We didn't want to get hyponatremic, which some of you all heard about that before. Oh, nice bottle there. Is drinking too much plain water when you're in an environment that's warm and you are sweating a lot. So ultra exercise. It can happen in a marathon. I did a post around that, around hyponatremia, and Precision have lots of really good advice around that. So we just don't want to get low blood sodium. So you absolutely nailed that. He would have been in a heap of trouble medically. It's one of the things we chatted about in the testing. He's has picked up when we mention it, but it was something that just needed to be aware of. It's quite hard to do, to become hyponatremic, but that's a fascinating insight. One of the things that really, and I was obviously following it most days, and you were great with the odd post you did, and the one of them was you were like, oh, measuring weight. I was like, my brain went to immediately like, yeah, okay, so you're in the desert. Finding a nice stable service is going to be hard. I wonder how they're
Yeah,
doing that, and
good question.
I'm thinking this out loud. I'm like, yeah, I don't think that's going to be very accurate, but it's a nice thing. Anyway, there I see you standing on the back of a pickup truck,
Yeah,
and I was like, bang on, well done. You put the scale. Obviously, it's not perfectly straight, but which amazing how it affects a scale. But you thought, well, we need some hard surface because if anyone stood on a scale on a carpet,
but but really important to because you know that's still a crude measurement. Yeah, we would battle. We'd finish and then try and find the stable point to park the pickup because you have any sort of gradient
yeah,
there,
it's like.
it messes the measurement. So you do have to be careful. But yeah, that was a bit of a challenge. So
Yeah, no,
you've got
well
to
done.
take all of
Such a
these.
simple thing of like, okay, we just want to manage your losses. We know we're never going to stay on top of it during the run. So the key thing is never, you're not trying to replace during the run, lose, oh, I've lost a liter. So you drank around 750 to a liter an hour, but the sodium in there helped retain some of the fluid. He was obviously sweating. He still could chat most of the time. He probably would have had some darker moments, but that's often just cognitive function, tiredness, and a bit of fuel. And then also he was probably taking, by the looks of it, he was taking in the sites quite a lot, which is that must have been some phenomenal. That we haven't even touched on the nature, the location.
Mm.
That would blow my mind daily. Eventually, you probably get quite used to it as well, and then it becomes quite the norm, and that's sunrise. So, oh man, that's
Just
just
one
fascinating.
thing just to finish if I can on the hydration thing because I think it's an
Yeah.
important thing to talk about here. So we also did another tool we had is we had this urine refractometer which measures the specific gravity of urine and it gives you a very accurate hydration status. It gives you your urine osmolality it's called. And what's key about this is because yeah a lot of people don't have access to that resource. I mean you can buy them at relatively expensive piece of kit but it's very simple once you've I had the privilege every day of measuring, yeah, taking Spencer's urine sample. But
Beautiful.
the important point of that is what people will talk about quite a lot, or an easy way, an easy gauge, right, of am I hydrated? Is you people go to the toilet, look at the color of their urine, and say, right, where's my hydration status? And again, talking about crude measurements, that Spencer would finish every single day with very dark colored urine. Of course, even drinking 6 liters of fluid and all this sodium that what I see when I see myself and I go to the toilet and it's dark and colored urine, my first thought is, my kidneys are working. And you have to remember that your your body,
Mm.
what happens when you get dehydrated is your kidneys say, right, what can I afford to lose here and what do I need to keep? And your kidneys go, right, well, we'll keep this amount of water because we're running out, or it might even assess you're on the way down. It doesn't know your kidneys don't know when you're about to drink or what you're about to do next. And so it will keep a little bit of that on board, and then what comes out is then darker because there's less water in it. That doesn't necessarily always mean you're about to go down because your urine is a very dark color. Um, and obviously we would finish and as I said, your body doesn't know what you're about to do next. You'd suddenly then take on lots of water and the next pee might be completely clear. And it's not because you've all of a sudden changed your hydration status. Your body is just incredibly clever. It knows that homeostasis is coming. So before it just suddenly went, right, shut down. We'll keep all the water. And then it looks like you're in a bad way because your urine is suddenly quite dark. But then all of a sudden you take on lots of water. And before that's had a hydration effect on your whole system, your body's very clever at knowing, right, okay, now we can afford to rebalance and now we're back to normal. And so I think using just an eyesight test, it's sometimes, I don't want to put anyone off. Obviously, if you have dark urine, it's time to start drinking. But just yeah, that in and of itself, when I compared it to the numbers of what it actually said if it is hydration, using this urine refractometer, the osmolality check was he was never really beyond anything we would call severely hyperhydrated, which is great for
Oh man,
5 hours in the
um,
desert. Yeah,
yeah, that's such a good important point, and thank you for going into the detail of we do a lot of the around the P color and the good old classic P charts that used to be on the in the rugby changing rooms, and a lot of the work Precision do, and I've learned from them, is to try and educate people like not to necessarily have 100% clear P. And yes, you just ran into really good detail around dark is okay, but there's something happening in the human body, and it's quite interesting. Back to the homeostasis, your body always try to realign unless you've got a kidney deficiency. And so you were mainly also checking if there was you were actually going too low in the blood sodium, because of course there's an element of dehydration. Of course, that's actually fine. Where humans are fine at getting dehydrated. I think people get quite worried about getting dehydrated in a marathon. It's a relative term. So you were just tightly checking that regulation, that the body's doing its job all right, the kidneys were functioning, and you weren't going the other way actually to dilute. So it would give you a reading. I've never done actually any work with that. I've never had to do multiple days with someone, but it converts it, I assume, to a reading that's close to, because I know a body likes to stay in 135 to 145 in terms of millimoles of relating to your osmolarity of your blood plasma. So I assume that is what you were kind of just
yeah,
looking at.
yeah.
Yeah,
And the last thing to say on that is very interesting that you can stay within this range and all be well and good, and that's and like by and large we were, but there were two occasions that I can recall, possibly three, where Spencer on occasion, and it's totally understandable. We're all humans. He would get to the end, towards the end of a marathon, and kind of be done with it. And I just want to get it over now. And you in this situation neuromuscularly, so we'll
yeah,
call it how his legs feel, is probably what most people was how your legs, that's kind of how you're basically assessing what neuromuscular condition you're in. He's pretty much always fine. If you're getting into a state there where you're really struggling, that's a real red flag actually. So the perceived associated costs of running the last 5 kilometer a bit quicker is extremely low in his mind because well he's completely fine, his legs don't hurt, he's not at injury risk. Can I finish? I mean, at this rate, you're talking
yeah,
5K, maybe 4 or 5 minutes quicker, but still, you want to be done at that time. And he pushed a little bit more, and maybe it was, the hydration slipped a little bit towards the back end. Perhaps it was a bit hotter those days, but it was really clear on the couple of occasions that happened. We would then do the urine osmolality check at the end, and it was it the to the point I just want to make is yes, you can. It was quite, we were fine a lot of the time, but it was amazing to see in real time how little it took to suddenly be okay. Now we're not okay, and the few occasions he pushed it, it was never more than 5K from the finish. You were talking less than half an hour. You
wow.
can really suddenly put yourself in the red. And there those three occasions where it came up is he was severely hyperhydrated, and that was it was a real, not necessarily eye-opening moment, but just a good reality check of saying, yeah, we can't afford to just be silly for even half an hour because that could be end game. So yeah, it was interesting to see that happening.
That is gold because, of course, I coach triathletes and we do multiple sessions a day. Sometimes, you're doing two sessions a day, certainly in an Ironman block. Ultra runners, I know, train sometimes double runs, but you might not run 7 days and double days, certainly. And you struggle but with the recovery from that, and you don't have access to these hydration monitors, and you just basically assuming and looking at P color. A lot of the time we're pretty groggy, so that is absolute gold. If we learn one thing from this, it's is keeping some keeping some back for the day after.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. In strength training, we call it reps in reserve. You had this term, you keep three or four in reserve. Similar thing.
I find with a lot of my long distance people that they're quite happy to eat, and it's quite a lot around the intra-session fueling, which is becoming better understood. But then coming back, and it's not just about drinking plain water. It's important to also finish up with that. Not everyone needs a ton of electrolytes. It's not that we all need additional sodium. Some of us we all lose sodium in our sweat. That's fine. The most important thing is we have a variable amount. The highest I've seen is 1800 milligrams per liter of sweat. You lose 1,000 milligrams per liter. Spencer just a few milligrams shy. Genetically, that's just going to pretty much stay there or thereabouts. The body's not a robot, so physiology changes daily, monthly, weekly. But for the rest of your life, you will be in that moderate range, and you've been in that through your whole life. So cramping probably was never going to be an issue. And I'm so glad that you got through 30 days. Yes, you had camp life, logistic stuff, which will finish off on any funny things that happened. But by the sounds of the feedback I was getting from you, that the comms we had, like actually he was great. Energy was pretty much fine. No cramping, no like hydration dramas, niggles. Let's call it the dreaded word injuries. He obviously had some nice treatments. He had a team, so it was just it's just
Mm.
if you're going to do a challenge like that, it's like running a training camp. It's 3 times the length, 4 times the length of a normal training camp. So no, well done,
Yeah.
mate. And no, that's awesome. It's just so nice to be doing something different and part of, we normally just test athletes for 1 day events or maybe an ultra, which is a few days, or a 5 day stage race. Any funny stories, dramas, any quick toilet, let's say bush dramas,
Well,
but no, there's no bush. There's no bush to
that's yeah.
run.
As I say, that's the unfortunate downside of the any
Yeah,
funny stories from this are just toilet humor because yeah, 10
toilet.
people going to the
Yes.
toilet in the wild for a month was
You had to dig
yeah,
holes and take it in a bag home.
yeah,
And
yeah. It's not wasn't the
it's
nicest environment, but
yeah.
go on, you're gonna say.
Oh yeah, no, that was. I mean, that's where my brain was going to. Is like, look, we all thinking it. We all, yeah, but you're all just blokes, and you all had to just get on with it.
It's too early for that sort of toilet
It's
humor.
too early,
But
yeah, and
look,
think,
look, just to say on the challenges side of it, like
yeah,
obviously it was, from the outside, smooth sailing. It was kind of what you want, right? From the thing is to not
phew,
have too many things to come across, and we were lucky to have that. But to talk about camp life, that one of the most difficult things, which you might not appreciate and might not sound that difficult, was the boredom. You'd finish and have 17 hours in
17
open
hours.
desert with the same seven blokes. Like it was draining emotionally and physically to
Yeah,
try and then because also we're running in the morning and then you've got the heat of the day.
yeah,
Suddenly it's over 40 degrees and you've got to try and sleep because you woke up at 2 and you're going to bed at 7.
yes,
There's like it's yeah the one of the challenges. I wish it sounded more dramatic and sexier than boredom, but it was boring,
yeah,
really boring during the day,
yeah,
and that's hard work.
yeah. No,
Um,
I guess that, and you fed that back a little bit, and I picked that up from a bit of his comms, is publicity, because there ain't no like, it would have been quite a nice iPhone detox for most, and obviously you had the odd bit of satellite and stuff, I'm sure, but yeah, you're not scrolling through loads of Instagram and watching YouTube, so quite a lot of alone time with yourself, yeah, and then yeah. Oh no, that's cool, man. So you're all back from that, all set. Thanks, bud. That's awesome. You've got a
Thank you for the
baby.
support. Seriously.
No, it's brilliant. You've got a baby due soon in about a month, not even a month, a few weeks.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
4 weeks to go.
4 weeks. Yeah, in about a
Exciting.
month. Yeah, that's brilliant. I send you all the best for that in the next journey, and you'll be. It'll be awesome, especially running in the peaks where you guys are, and Hannah,
Yeah.
and what have you got lined up? Uh, any crazy stuff yourself?
That's it for mid-season. I put a post up. I slept for 10 hours last night. I just put a story up
10.
before we came on saying my
Yeah,
body knows it's the end of the season. I think
yeah.
I'm
10
shutting
is.
down a little bit.
Yeah, so just tick
It's
over, keep
tired.
fit, business stuff, and then no doubt the new year there'll be something.
Yeah, we've got a few things
Oh,
already kind
okay.
of
Yeah.
challenge-wise sorted for next year. And yeah, it's
Oh,
just going
wow.
to be a whole new adventure of managing that around having a
Yes.
six,
You,
7, 8 month old baby.
yeah.
But
You'll
we'll
be.
work it out.
Yeah, it's awesome. I certainly know from my little guys. Well, I must come down to the peaks. It's not far from me, hour and a half, and I'll come for a run. I won't be doing
Please do.
30 days straight, but it'll be great to have a coffee and a chat, and yeah, just see you. And by then, your little one will be around. So that's cool. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.